And indeed, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent. Just let me know when I can start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everything
Hi,
meeting.
Carl. I'm Ayman. We will start in a second.
Okay. No.
Everything technically ready?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So, as I was saying, Carl, basically the world of podcast has been growing for a while. Quite a big audience. and yeah, and I think voice technology has definitely recognized that and has definitely stepped in the world of podcasts since it started growing rapidly in the last years. And I think Carl from Voice Tech Podcast will definitely share with us some interesting insights on and actually interesting take on how the world of podcast, voice tech, and content marketing are actually converging. And I'm quite interested to see how this will unfold from you, Carl. Thank you very much. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Okay, so hello everyone. It's great to be here virtually. I would have loved to have joined in person, but unfortunately, like I said, I've got a baby at home I had to take care of, so it wasn't possible this year. You have to excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold as well, so which is why I'm drinking lots of water. But the purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to a whole new way to create audio content for your business, for marketing. I call it Host in the Machine as a play on words. A little bit about me. I'm actually the host of the Voice Tech podcast. So that's a podcast all about conversational AI, smart speakers, and the like. Interviewed more than 100 experts in that domain. And then one thing I found in the Voice Tech podcast is that it really does take a long time to produce audio content. So that's actually the problem that we seek to solve at Rumble Studio, which is my new company. Co-founder, CEO of Rumble. We basically provide a SaaS platform to enable marketers to launch and grow their brand on audio channels. We offer an online tool that marketers use to easily conduct remote guest interviews and then allow them to publish those as podcasts, which hopefully build brand awareness, trust, and authority. We also offer a range of services to help plan, edit, and promote these branded podcasts. So the problem, as I briefly touched on, is so we're creating a new way to create audio for marketing, essentially, and this involves recording a spoken interaction with a machine, which is why I'm speaking at this event about conversational AI. Like I say, the idea is to record those conversations and then publish these as branded podcasts, but not just branded podcasts, but also audio FAQs, microcasts, client testimonials. There's lots of reasons why you'd want to conduct a multi-turn structured interview and then record it. Our tool allows marketers to get started in podcasting because there's a lot of barrier to entry to get started, or once you have started, to create more audio in less time. And this also allows you to market your business in new and creative ways, which is what we're all interested in doing. And one of the key advantages is to actually increase engagement with your clients and your team. And I'll explain more of this later on. So brief background on audio content marketing then. Today, content marketing across the board, all forms of content marketing like email newsletters, social media, videos, blogging, etc., are all on the rise. And podcast is getting special attention from marketers, 30% CAGR spent on ads in podcasts alone. Branded podcasts, that is podcasts that are created by the brands themselves and are not stuffed with ads usually, are growing fastest of all. We're seeing 60% CAGR. So more and more brands are looking to actually create podcasts themselves as opposed to spending money on ads on other people's podcasts. There are relatively few podcasts compared to other content marketing mediums, such as blogs. You know, there are 450 million WordPress blogs, for example, 31 million YouTube channels, probably a lot more since I got that stat, but only about 850,000 podcasts, depending on who you ask. Some people quote 2 million, but half of the podcasts on the Apple Podcast Store are inactive, and only half of the active ones have, I think, an average of 7 episodes. And so there's very high attrition, and this is something that we seek to solve at Rumble Studio as well. And it's a shame because podcasts actually do work. A BBC study in 2019 showed that customers that listen to podcasts have a 14% higher purchase intent, and so it's worth having one. The impact of voice technology and audio content can't be understated. So smart speakers, I don't need to tell you, very fast adoption there. And in my opinion, audio content is the killer app today. It's what I use it for the most. I ask for the news, I request, listen to songs, etc. And there's more and more interactive content. So there's content that we can interact with. There's interactive ads that are coming out. And this content is accessed on demand by simply stating what you want. and therefore that involves voice search and audio SEO considerations as well. And often, and more, we see smaller bite-sized content being returned, so answers to questions or microcasts for the news, etc. So those are some quick trends. So the problem at Rumble Studio that we seek to solve, as I mentioned, is that audio content creation is very slow. On the Voice Tech podcast, when I was doing everything myself, even once I'd figured out the entire process and I'd done it many, many times, still took me about 10 hours to produce each episode. So that was my entire weekend and really the impetus to launch this company. Brands know this too, and it either stops them from doing it at all, or it makes them quit soon after they do it. And that is described as pod fade, if you haven't come across that term. So brands see podcasts as having low ROI. This is a view that we seek to change. And as a result, only 2% of US companies create any audio themselves. The options today are pay an expensive agency to do it all for you, or do it yourself, which takes a long time and takes up a lot of the time of your staff. So I see the solution to this coming from the new machine learning tools that we have available to us. And we seek to create a solution that provides a cost-effective and scalable way to make audio consistently. And I say consistently because launching a podcast doesn't bring you immediate results. It's more of a slow burn activity. You need to do it consistently, every week perhaps, over a period of months and years to really realize the benefit of that activity. But once you are well known for it, then those benefits do come thick and fast. So our solution comprises of three main aspects. One is asynchronous interviews. Two is the use of voice synthesis and also voice transformation technologies. And three, automated dialogue generation. And I'm going to dive into all of these in more depth. So asynchronous interviews, this is really at the core of the new system we're proposing. This involves a marketer, content marketer perhaps, sending questions to their guest via Rumble Studio. They can write the questions themselves, or they can choose from a selection of question templates. And then the guest gets a link in their inbox, they click it, they go to Rumble Studio, or whichever software implements this process. And then it's actually interviewed not by the marketer, but by the machine itself. So the machine actually poses the questions to the guest. They can hear them in audio. That can be the human recorded audio, it can be synthetic audio. And then the guest records their answers in their own time. And then once they're happy with the audio, they submit it. The marketer gets that audio back. They can quickly review the audio with the transcripts that are generated, select only the best guest answers, so discard the rest, and then choose to re-record the questions or indeed add a narration layer to be able to tell the story around the answers that the guests have provided. And then that finished audio can be exported with the tool, published as a podcast, an audio FAQ embedded into a website, used for client testimonial gathering, and many more use cases. So synthetic voices are another key aspect of this solution. Obviously, we can use text-to-speech to do that, and the quality of the text-to-speech I'll show you in a moment. It really has come on a great deal in the last few months and years. There are many advantages to using synthetic voices to generate audio content for marketing. For a start, you don't need to invest in any recording equipment or learn how to use and set up that equipment. And the typical content marketer probably doesn't have any interest in doing that either. No need to train the content marketer to have any interview skills, and interviewing, asking the right questions in the right way is definitely a skill that is acquired over a period of time. Not everyone's good at that. You don't need to find somebody in your organization that has a great voice either. Text-to-speech provides a consistent brand voice. And more these days, brands are training their own voices. There are many services on the market, and I see more popping up each week that produce excellent human quality voices that brands use across all their marketing channels, video, voice, and the like. Voice cloning is now possible, and it is pretty accurate. I've cloned my voice with a couple of systems. So if the CEO absolutely insists on being the host of the podcast, but just doesn't have time to do that every week, then that is now a possibility as well. And another big benefit with synthetic voices is if you ever need to make changes to the recorded audio later on, then you can do that very quickly and easily. So just to prove the point, I wanted to play a sample of synthetic voices in 2021 to show you that they are indeed capable of hosting a podcast. First up, we have an example from Well Said Labs, which could easily be an introduction to a podcast.
Karen is the senior AI editor at MIT Technology Review, covering the field's cutting-edge research and its impacts on society. She writes a weekly newsletter called The Algorithm, which was named one of the best newsletters on the internet in 2019 by the Webby Awards.
Next, we have an ad sample from Vocal ID.
Feels like summer is finally here. We've got drinks and snacks for the whole family in aisle 6.
Now we have some more emotion-rich samples, the first of which is from resemble.ai.
Keep your expectations low, boy, and you'll never be disappointed.
And this next one from Sonantic is dripping with emotion. You can really hear the tears in the voice.
I can see this hurts, but I had to tell you sooner.
Forget it. I trusted you.
But if you look at it...
You never listen. You don't listen. You're never here when I need you.
Okay, so pretty impressive. I think you'll agree. And like I say, there are many different TTS providers now, each focusing on a different niche or a use case. Some are fast to generate. Others take longer to generate the audio, but provide more emotion-rich sounds, like the last one you just heard there. Like I say, all the big tech players are offering this nowadays. Follow on from that is actually voice transformation. So instead of synthesizing a voice from scratch or from text, you can actually modify a human voice. And this can be useful in a variety of different situations. One of them is to change the character of the voice. So there is a speech-to-speech, as provided by companies like Marvel.ai, that can actually change your voice into the voice of another person, for example. And so you can do if you do your best Barack Obama impression, then the tone of the voice will also sound like him, but it's you actually speaking live. And you can actually apply these technologies live or real time. So this can, of course, be used in the world of podcasting, whether to completely change your identity or just to enhance, a characteristic in your voice that you want to be enhanced. One of those characteristics can actually be your accent. So there's a company called Sanos.ai that does a very impressive Indian to American accent conversion. You can imagine that being used in call centers to help with intelligibility, so that American audience can actually understand what's being said. And then on the topic of intelligibility, there are many other companies that are working on this as well. So, for example, Voclarity is working on a technology which they've demoed as well, and I was very impressed by, which allows you to more easily understand podcast recordings that have been sped up. So many people listen to podcasts on 1.5x or 2x the speed, but it often becomes quite choppy, the audio. And so with a post-processing treatment by Voclarity, that becomes smoother and much more easier to listen to. Crisp.ai, I'm sure you're familiar with, removes the background noise, audio events, these kinds of things. So all of these can be integrated into content creation platforms and to increase the intelligibility and the enjoyment of the content. So the last piece of the puzzle is the automated dialogue generation. This is the bit that I'm most excited about, and maybe you are too, because it uses the chatbot technology that you guys are familiar with. Essentially, in a system such as Rumble Studios, you put the first question to the guest, who then records their answer. But then the system actually listens to and interprets that with speech to text and natural language understanding, pulls out key terms, perhaps it's named entity recognition, perhaps it's the emotion in the voice, and then makes a decision and generates a follow-up question in real time, synthesizes that with text-to-speech, and then poses that back to the guest to continue the dialogue. And so a simple example would be if you're interviewing a doctor and they say we use MRI machines in our hospital, the machine can quickly say, oh, you mentioned MRI. For those who don't know, what does MRI stand for, please? And then the doctor can continue. And this has the benefit of making conversations longer. And so you get more bang for your buck. You can ask maybe 5 questions up front, the main topic questions, and let the machine take 2 or 3 turns after each to really dig into those topics as a traditional podcast interviewer would. It goes deeper on the topics, so it's better for the listener, and it makes the dialogue more spontaneous because not all the questions are set up front, which avoids that kind of wooden back and forth question answer type feel that you might expect from an audio questionnaire. So this is possible thanks to large pre-trained language models like OpenAI's GPT-3 and whatever's coming next. There are more and more conversational models now, so Google's Lambda Facebook's Blender, which is actually open source and can be customized and has memory over what was said previously. Very impressive results coming from these. And you can actually fine tune these for specific domains. So if I'm interviewing doctors, then we can actually learn to recognize and respond to medical terminology, for example. This is an example of Google's Lambda. So you can see it's actually almost cracking jokes at this stage. And so these are the types of technologies that we can combine to realize a number of distinct advantages. The asynchronous format combined with synthetic voices and that automated dialogue generation, first of all, makes things just much more convenient. It allows you to avoid scheduling calls and hoping the guest turns up. It allows you to get time with busy guests much more easily. So people like executives or doctors or people who don't have time to sit down for 90 minutes and be interviewed, but would love to share their thoughts on a subject, now can do that in their own time from the comfort of their own home. It's more scalable because once you've created the questions once, you can multiply that and invite many, many guests. You can send that same question template to 100 guests. In fact, in Rumble Studio, we actually have a public link now for a conversation. We can put it on social media, for example, and anyone who clicks that link gets their own version of those questions and can go through the conversation themselves. And so you can gather a lot of audio in very little time. One thing we found actually with our tests is that it increases the quality of the guest audio content because guests are giving their answers in a zero pressure environment. They can actually think about what they say before they say it, structure their answer better, and then when they deliver it, they're more relaxed. And so you get a better quality answer from the guest. Also, the guest has the option to re-record their answers. And so if they make a mistake, they can just do it again. And a lot of guests are perfectionists. You know, they know this is going out publicly, so they want to get it right. And so when you get that audio back, there's actually less editing to do because the guest has actually done a lot of the editing for you, which is great. So that saves time. And the last advantage, last couple of advantages I wanted to mention were more control and consistency. And so this is really important for brands and for agencies, for example, because you can review the questions before they go out. Then you can review the answers when they come back from the transcripts. And then you can take the time to actually craft that, that narrative over the top. You don't necessarily have to use the questions that you sent originally to get those answers. You can re-record new questions, or you can just produce a podcast with a narration style and tell the story that you want to say backed up by what the guest said. And lastly, it improves accessibility in a number of ways. By lowering the barrier to entry to creating audio, it just allows more people to get involved. It allows content marketers who wouldn't feel comfortable on the mic or wouldn't have time to run a full podcast to be able to actually get involved. It makes it more worthwhile for brands to actually launch a podcast for their niche subject. So you don't need to get hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of listeners onto your podcast when you launch a branded podcast. An audience of 500 highly engaged listeners is more than enough, especially when you're selling a high value product and often a complex product that requires education and explaining over time. This is what is the essence of a branded podcast, is these small, highly engaged audiences. But it also improves accessibility by allowing people who wouldn't otherwise be able to create audio at all, people with physical challenges, or even people who don't speak the language in which they wish to do the podcast in well enough. So, for example, I can speak some French, but I would never dare to do a podcast in French. I don't think anyone would want to listen to that. But thanks to text-to-speech, for example, and online translation tools, I could quite easily craft an interview in French and then send that to French speakers and be able to capture that audio. So it's an idea for brands and agencies that serve brands, is the concepts of scale and engagement. So instead of creating one big hairy podcast that aims to satisfy all of your listeners, which might be comprised of different customer segments, you can actually create multiple shows or indeed more episodes, each episode targeted at a different niche or customer segment in your audience. Essentially, it allows you to create more content volume, and that increases your mind share across a greater variety of different audience types. And also, opinion canvassing increases engagement. So instead of the typical single interview guest, you can actually run interviews involving opinions from multiple guests. So you imagine you prepare 3 or 4 questions and you send those to 20 people. 10 of whom reply to your request and actually record some audio. And then you include the best bits from those guests into your final podcast. And this allows you to engage many more people in your team or in your client base or just in your general audience. So that's the creator engagement. But then it also brings on many opinions into that single podcast episode, which provides a more rounded view of the topic and makes it more relevant for the listener. So there's higher listener engagement there as well. So that's what I've got for you today. I'd love it if you would contact me so we can discuss how audio can help your business. We're looking for partners to work with, brands and agencies to create some audio with now. So just drop me an email, carl@rumble.studio. We can actually book a demo, rumble.studio/demo. Thank you very much.
For that. Thank you for the presentation. I think maybe we can take some questions from the audience if there's any questions. Does anybody? Yeah, there's a question here. Just 1 second, Carl.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Thomas Granryd. I work for a broadcaster in Sweden, so this is super interesting. Just a reflection, the quality of the synthesized voice now, and the examples that you're showing is extremely good. It feels like they have taken a huge leap the last year or something. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it blows me away. And I heard one just yesterday from NVIDIA's Riva that is superb, like can absolutely be used out of the box.
How do you understand how they do these voices filled with emotions? How can they produce it? What parameters are used? Like?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the source data that they train on, which is why there are so many of these companies, because they each focus on a different niche. Not to mention different languages, etc. But these machine learning models essentially reproduce what they've already encountered. And so I think it's more about training the models on people pretending to cry, probably. I hope it's not people actually crying. And then just offering that as a product.
One last question. Do you know, I'm from Sweden. Do you know, and that's a very small country and a small language, of course. Do you know any good companies that are doing synthesized voice in those small regions or small countries?
Not off the top of my head, but I can have a look. And if you like, if you drop me an email, actually, I can have a look and I can send you some details.
Super, thanks.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. So, any further questions for Carl? Perfect, Carl. I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you very much for that. And I think, Carl, I wish you all the best, and I'll be definitely listening to your podcast again very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Perfect. Bye-bye.